this computer. All right. Recording's going. Everybody's here. People are going to trickle in. Somebody just left. That's not cool. All right. So I've got kind of a good news, bad news situation. The good news is that we're here and we're going to get to hang out for the next hour or so. Bad news. So mock interview breakdowns are scheduled every Friday afternoon. Typically what happens is I interview a student and then record it. And then during this hour, we watch the recording and we talk about the interview. We talk about what the student was doing well, things the student could do to improve. And what's fun about that is that most of the time, the advice is pretty general and it can apply to everybody. And, it's a good way to practice and watch and learn about interviewing strategy. What had happened this morning, though, is this week was kind of crazy, and I had a student that was scheduled to interview with me, and he bailed at the very last minute, literally 2 minutes before we were supposed to interview. And there were some backup volunteers, but I didn't really want to put anybody on the spot, and I would have felt bad about that. So, I don't want to, embarrass the student or make him feel bad, but he kind of sounds like a bit of a wimp. I think he was a little scared, and that's okay. I will have another interview ready to go for next Friday, but I didn't want to cancel this thing 2 weeks in a row. So there is something that I have been asked about, and I've been wanting to do a lesson about this for, 2 years since I've been at Lambda School, and students ask about it all the time. And that's what we're going to spend the next hour talking about. And that is take-home challenges, take-home skill assessments, take-home code tests, generally. And I went and dug through my email, and I found the last time I ever had to do this as an engineer, the most recent time I ever had to do this as an engineer. I went and found the code test. I went and found my solution. I went and found the email thread where I was communicating with the team that ended up sending it to me. And we're going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about strategies for take-home skills assessments. I'm going to show you a real one that I submitted to a job company and ended up getting this job. And it's at a company that's since hired 5 or 6 Lambda School students. Does that sound like a decent consolation prize to not watching an interview? Okay, cool. So students, like I said, have asked about this all the time for years. I do think that there is a bit of an art to this. And we're going to talk about that kind of stuff. So before I do that, I just want to make one thing super, super, super clear. And that is that I have permission from this company to share this information with you. This test is 4 years ago that this happened. So this is not a test that they still use. And I emailed them first just to ask if it was okay if I used their stuff and showed it to, there's 60 people live, but I'm recording this and I'm going to upload it. And the last time I did one of these one-offs, it got leaked onto YouTube and it got 1,000 views. So I don't know how many of you have seen there's a video where I look at GitHub profiles. It was Chris Beards was the student. But it just happened at the end of a mock interview breakdown. Somebody asked about what people were looking for at their GitHub. I ended up spending 30 minutes talking about it and posted it to YouTube, the Lambda School YouTube. Yeah, no, somebody posted it. It got leaked on Twitter, and then it had 1,200 views. And I felt kind of bad about that because, I didn't want Chris's stuff all over the internet, but somebody leaked it. So anyway, that's just to say that when companies design take-home challenges and skills assessments like this, it takes a lot of time. They're usually designed to look for a couple of skills, and certainly when I was hiring for positions, I've always like had something I was optimized, like built the test and the rubrics towards that specific skill. It just takes a lot of time. It's not like just pulling a random like code challenge off the shelf or out of some database somewhere. That a lot of companies are really intentional about this, and it really sucks when your code challenges get leaked online and your solutions get shared and people cheat and stuff, because then that introduces like bias into your hiring process, and it just really sucks. You have to go spend a lot of time writing a new one. So that's just to say that over the next couple of months, you are all going to start applying for jobs. If you remember from the measuring success lesson that we teach the first day of labs, I have a slide where I say that hiring managers need to know 3 things about you before they can make you a job offer. Like number 1 is, can this person do the job? Number 2, can this person work with my team? Number 3, can this person solve problems for my business? That first one will be assessed for everyone. It doesn't really matter if you're like a mobile student, if you're a design student, if you are data science student, if you're a web student. Like all of you are probably going to have to take some kind of take-home test that's the same in this process. And most of the principles are the same. And the first one is like, number 1, don't cheat. Do not share it with people. This is something that can really harm the reputation of Lambda School overall. Like, if a bunch of students are applying to a company, they'll collaborate on answers. So just like, I'm trying to just make this as clear as possible. Under no circumstances should you share a code test, a code challenge, your solutions, any of that with anyone without like explicit written consent from the company, which I obtained before sharing this with you. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive into it. So I popped open some questions threads. We've got labs 19 and 20 present. There's probably going to be quite a bit of time for questions at the end of this, and I imagine this is going to be kind of an interactive presentation anyway. So try to keep your questions in the Slack threads to help us stay organized. And let's dive into it. So got a couple of screenshots here, some emails. I'm going to share those. Is there a better way just to share a screenshot than just like clicking the share screen? All right. All right, I think it's this one. It's hard to tell. All right, it's that one. Okay. Everybody see this email screenshot? Great. All right. So this is the email company sent. I don't remember what he's referring to right here where it says meeting me in person today. I don't know if I like had already had an on-site or if we just like bumped into each other or something. I can't remember the circumstances. But basically like we had a pretty casual conversation, and the first thing they wanted to do before they like invited me to join their team was to assess my skills and abilities to contribute, see if I could do the job. So this is what the email says. It's nice meeting you in person. For the next steps, we'd love to schedule time for you to come in and meet the founders. In the meantime, we do have a coding challenge to get a feel for your work. To be fully transparent, the main things we are looking for are good engineering practices, well-tested code, and thoughtful code organization. And then there's a description of the challenge. The description of the challenge says, the KGB has noticed a resurgence of overly excited reviews for McCaig Chevrolet Buick, a dealership they have planted in the United States. In order to avoid attracting unwanted attention, you've been enlisted to scrape reviews for this dealership from Dealer Rater with the URL. Uncover the top 3 worst offenders of these overly positive endorsements. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to write a tool that scrapes the first 5 pages of reviews, identifies the top 3 most overly positive endorsements using criteria of your choosing documented in the README, outputs these 3 reviews to the console in order of severity. Please include documentation around how to run your application, along with how to run the test suite. And feel free to let us know if you have any questions. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing your solution. Okay, so in this email, there are a few things this company has pointed out that are important to them and should be present in their solution. So let's talk about those. All right. I mean, let's pop some mics off of mute. What would you say? Like, what are some things that what they gave me the answer to the solution right here in this email. They told me exactly what to look for to include in my solution to pass.
Good engineering practices.
Okay, Jeremy, that is a quote from the email. Yes.
Testing.
Okay, testing. Yeah, who said that?
Sam.
That was Sam. All right, testing is two. Okay.
Documentation.
Documentation, right? Yep. Yeah, the big one is testing. Good engineering practices is kind of, I mean, that's kind of general. That's not super specific. Testing and documentation are the things that are like, those are binary answers, Jeremy, right? So what's really interesting about this code solution is that I've completed this code test. They made me a job offer like 3 days later, and then I got hired onto their team, and I was screening these code tests like a week after that. So I was like in the first meeting where they're like, okay, here's the rubric for this code test. I remember thinking like, oh, I can see how my solution like hit that or fill that rubric up. But I also like watched the process of all these other guys that were like, well, the team was all guys at the time. We can talk about that later. Screening these things, and like the checklist of things to look at was like, number one, does this project or the solution that the candidate has submitted, does it include like a documentation file or a README? And like, if no, fail, pass, move on to the next candidate. Does the thing include a test file and like, or folder or some kind of tests? And like, if no, like fail. And we haven't even looked at code yet. We're just looking at the files that are contained in the zip solution that I sent over to them, right? Like, we haven't looked at the code. We haven't like loaded a website. I haven't even tried to run the application. I'm just checking for the presence of a couple of files. And like, I open it up and make sure it's not blank. And I'm like, okay, there's a non-blank README. There's a non-blank test file. Now we can actually look at the solution. But you would be surprised how many people didn't even include those two like pieces, even though it was like explicitly contained in the email. So like rule number one, and this might sound obvious, but it's not. And you'd be surprised at how many people skip this step. If the email explicitly asks for a thing, you damn well deliver that thing. So in this case, like I don't care if they say like put your 9 favorite emojis in there. Like, don't show up with 8 pieces of flair. You know what I mean? Like, you got to hit like exactly what they asked for in the checklist, because they have a checklist. They wrote a checklist at the same time they were writing the email to like introduce the challenge. So if there's something in the email, like make sure that it's covered in your thing, because there's a checklist somewhere, right? And no amount of awesome code is gonna trump the checklist, because you like don't even get to that step, right? The checklist happens first. Okay, so that's like the first thing is like logistically make sure that you follow all the directions like to the letter. Now the second thing, and this is like a little bit more subtle, but like once you've checked all the boxes, you want to see if you can pick up any other clues about like what they might be looking for or interested in. Now this email is really, really interesting in terms of code challenges, because they introduce like there's this cute story problem about the KGB and spies and stuff, right? That like kind of theme is very much a comment on the culture of this company. And by maintaining like a little bit of playful spy and KGB related whimsy, you can set yourself apart from like somebody who's just gonna like write a strict implementation, right? Like they introduced a level of like razzle dazzle to their code challenge that I wanna mirror that and match the same level of razzle dazzle. You know what I mean? So you're gonna look at my solution, and there are some jokes, okay? But they started it. That's a really important point, right? If they had sent me like an all business email, like write tests, write documentation, find some way to measure, I would have gone a completely different direction with not only my implementation, but like the way that I sent it back to them, right? But because they had a little bit of, this fun little spy theme, I played into that. And that's like an advanced theme. at the minimum, you want to hit the checklist. And then if there is an opportunity for mirroring, you want to do that too. So I'm going to show you the email that I sent in response to them. And then we're going to look at the code that I wrote, and I'll tell you what I was thinking when I wrote it. So this is my email back to them. There's two guys, Arthur and Travis. Great guys. I've attached my solution to your coding challenge. It's too bad you don't go to too many URUG meetups. URUG is a Utah Ruby user group that I used to organize in where I live. And like a month or two before I did this code challenge, we had a meeting where I like literally like live coded a scraper. It was a Hacker News scraper, but that was the point of the meetup, is I like live coded a scraper for everyone. It was pretty fun. So I just mentioned that because I wanted to like let them know subtly that I like am really active in the community, because that's important to a lot of people. Anyway, so I said I decided to run with the KGB theme and build a sketchy command line tool. I feel it helps the vibe if you configure your terminal color scheme to be green on black and read all the commands in the voice of Boris from GoldenEye. I sent a link to, I assume this is probably a clip of Boris in GoldenEye. I had fun with it. Hope you enjoy my solution. And then we talk a little bit logistically about coming into the office interview. And then I just include a zip file with all the files. Now this is important too. Most of the time when somebody sends you a code challenge, they will give you specific instructions on how to submit it. Sometimes it'll say like, put it on your GitHub and send us a link to the repo. But most of the time, like I was stressing at the beginning, they don't want their prompts to be public, and you don't want that kind of stuff to leak out. So if you publish it to your GitHub, you're really making their life hard. So unless they explicitly tell you to share it in a public published way, like put this on your blog or tweet a link and send us that or whatever, unless they explicitly tell you to do it public, just assume they want it private. So this goes for coders, this goes for data scientists, this goes for UX designers. Unless you are explicitly given instructions to publish your work for a code challenge or any take-home skills test, like, don't. Send them a zip file, send them a PDF, send them, I don't know like what the situation with like permissions is around like Figma and other design tools or whatever platform they ask you, like do it private unless they explicitly say not to. That's really, really important. And then you notice, again, we talked a little bit about like just the whimsy and fun KGB thing. I just trying to match their level of like playfulness. So yeah, let's look at the code. So this is Ruby code, which is nice because Ruby's like really an easy language to just understand what's going on. So even like I'll do my best to explain it where it looks complicated, but most of you, even if you're data scientists or designers, will be able to understand what's going on here, because Jeremy pointed out that the first thing they asked for was like solid engineering practices and principles. Like the most important rule of being a good engineer is just like name things nicely. If your code's not readable, like you have a problem. And they also didn't specifically give me a language to use here. So I just kind of had to pick one that I assumed they might be familiar with. Ruby's my favorite. So let's look at some code. All right. So this is the README file. If we go back to the prompt, I'm just going to pull it up in my screen. You guys won't be able to see it, but I can. When they were talking about documentation, please include documentation around how to run your application along with how to run the test suite. So look for the presence of those things in this documentation. So this is the README. Here are the requirements. We need to have all these tools installed. I don't know why my formatter on Sublime is being weird, but whatever. Here's instructions on how to run the tests. Here's instructions on how to run the utility. And then here's a little bit of explanation. Oh, geez. Sorry, I did not have any, where's like the word wrap? Yeah. I didn't have a text, well, I didn't have Sublime or anything on this computer like before this lesson, so I had to install Sublime real quick, and these settings are gross. Anyway, this is the part that explains my algorithm. So the KGB review filter uses proprietary KGB algorithm designed to detect overly positive reviews. This algorithm detects excessive use of exclamation points to convey excitement. Nobody gets that excited about going to the car dealership. So I reviewed hundreds of these code challenges over the time that I worked at this company, and people would do all kinds of bananas stuff here to detect if reviews were fake as part of this code challenge. And it was like really fun to see people's implementations. Like, I mean, I have seen people go so far as like connecting with the Watson API and like running NLP on the text body of the review and then like giving it some score and stuff. Like, people went nuts with this piece. I went with like the simplest possible solution, which is just like split the string, count the exclamation points, and then that's the score. What's important to point out here is that like, that's not seen as like cutting a corner. That's seen as like abstracting as much things as possible. And I was like operating under a time constraint, and when we get to my code, I'll show you exactly where this happened, and you could drag and drop any kind of filter you wanted in there. I was just going for like simplest possible solution. And again, this is a little bit of the whimsy of the thing. So it's kind of cheating that I know what the rubric for this assessment included. I didn't at the time I wrote the code, but I do now. So once we checked for the presence of test files and documentation files and that they were non-empty, like we read the documentation and made sure that they included the three things that we asked for. Number one, how to run the tests. Number two, how to run the application. Number three, instructions describing the algorithm, or however we were determining flagging fake reviews, right? Those were the three things. So check, check, check. So the next step was review the tests and see what the assertions were and see whether the test coverage was good. And the first step would be to like run the test suite and to make sure that it passed. And I didn't want to install all this stuff on my computer. All the tests pass. You'll just have to take my word for it. As an interviewer, I would not. For the sake of time, all the tests pass. So that was step one. And then step two was just like to review the tests and see if they were like testing, they were following good engineering principles around testing, and that they were like testing logical things. So let's jump to the first test file. There's two test files here. In Ruby, this little underscore spec, that matches with a Ruby testing library called rspec. So that would denote to anyone who knows Ruby or has worked in a Ruby environment that those are test files. So anybody looking at this would see, okay, we've got two test files, we've got three code files, we've got a README. So let's look at the test files first. And then this is like syntax for writing Ruby tests. We require external libraries up here. This looks pretty similar to JavaScript, right? And then like this is a test block. So the describe just basically gives a name for your test. And then while you're writing the test, you have like, this is an assertion. So whatever's in this string like describes what the assertion is supposed to be testing. So our review collector should collect a bunch of reviews is the name of this test. So what that test does is it has a variable that it assigns to the output of this KGB review controller. Collector is just a class that has a method on it called collect reviews. So it calls that method on that class. And then this assertion says we expect that variable to not be empty. So Ruby's cool, huh? It's like just like this language. This is English. Anyway, what this test is doing is it says call this class. There's a method on it called collect reviews. And if that is actually collecting reviews and assigning some value that's not nothing to this reviews, the test will pass. So let's pop over to review collector and see what it does. So KGB, actually, no, let's go back to the other test first. So that's one test. Now, I don't know how much exposure or what level of depth that we cover in testing. That's certainly not the point of this lesson. But if we were looking at this like KGB collector class, the class has one public method, which means that there's really only one like function or method that can be called on this class. That means we don't need a whole bunch of tests. We don't need to test everything that happens inside the method. We just need to test that the output of the method is what we expect. Okay, so as a reviewer, one of like if I'm looking at the test file for a class and I'm looking at the class, if the class has 25 public methods and 2 tests, that's a problem because there's not enough test coverage for all the public methods. But if I'm looking at it and the number of tests exactly matches the number of public methods, this is like totally 100% my opinion, and people on the internet would fight me about this, but that's good. If your number of public methods matches your number of tests, you're probably in good territory, okay? If there's a big discrepancy between the two, you've got a problem. If I have one public method and 75 tests, we've got a problem. That's a really bad code smell, but it goes the other direction too. So anyway, that's like tangential to the point of this exercise in this lesson. That's just like testing principles. But the point is that nobody could possibly argue that this class is not well covered because the number matches exactly. Okay, so on the checklist, like the second item, like check for the presence, make sure the test pass. Third thing, pop open the test files and make sure that there's reasonable test coverage. Like if I'm like 1-to-1, I'm 100% covered right now. Let's look at my other test file. So my other test file, wow. So this is all just setting up some tests. We actually only have 2 test blocks in here. We have one that tests the process method, and we have one that tests the analyze, title, and body method. So all of this assignment that goes on right here is just setting up the test, but there's really only 2 tests that run, okay? So if we go pop open the processor, how many public methods do we have? I know this is tough because this is not a language that you know. The answer is 2. There are 2. So I had 2 tests and 2 public methods. Anybody keeping track of my test coverage? 3 for 3, 100%. How many of you have 100% test coverage on your labs project?
Okay, Holdaway. But there are arguments about like what kinds of testing are important, and there are different perspectives on it. So
Of course. Of course. I'm pointing out, Sam, that if somebody expressly tells you that they care a lot about testing, you get 100% test coverage. You organize your code in such a way that that's not only like achievable, but that that's practical, and you make sure that it happens. Because if they had told me we care a lot about testing, and then I submitted a test with like 10% coverage, it doesn't matter how good the rest of my code is. Like I straight up did not follow their instructions when I was like trying to be on my best behavior and get a job. I'm like trying to demonstrate the best possible engineering habits and practices I could possibly compel myself to do under ideal dream circumstances, working only by myself in a brand new code base on an open challenge in any language and environment that I chose. Like those are like dream greenfield conditions. And if I can't get to their bar of like what they're asking for, the question that pops into their head is like, what's this guy going to do if we hire him and we sit him down and we give him a task? Is he going to follow directions? Is he going to read the whole ticket? Is he going to consider the trade-offs and like the other stuff? Is like, no, like this person is not capable of doing the job we're going to ask them to do. Because even under like ideal circumstances, he won't follow directions. Like this is not somebody you can hire. So like I was kind of teasing about the 100% test coverage of your labs projects. Although if anybody got there,
you're kind of teasing.
I mean, I'm kind of teasing. I would love to see 100% test coverage. I'm not gonna like if I failed everybody who had less than 100% test coverage in labs, nobody would ever graduate from Lambda school, probably in history, and Austin would fire me. And so it's like we you know the incentives are not aligned to make that happen. But if somebody sends you an email and says, hey, you want to come work at my company, I'll set up a meeting for the founders who will make you a job offer as soon as you return this code test to my satisfaction. And one of the things that I require is that you write some good tests. Like, I'm going to just do that because that's the hoop that they're asking me to jump through in order to get this job. So we're at 100% test coverage, and the other code file, in case anybody wants to like get technical and call me out on having a method in here, does not have any public methods. So this entire application has 100% test coverage with 3 tests. It really this isn't like complicated code. This like implementation did not take me very long. It really was within the couple of hours that they allotted, and most of the time I spent just writing like my little puns for my output of my command line tool. But I just say that to point out that when somebody explicitly like gives you their requirements, you want to make sure that you hit all of those, and then that takes pressure off like the rest of your code solution. Because I want to show you a couple of other pieces of code in here that I'm like kind of like, I don't want to say embarrassed about, because has anybody here ever heard me tell the joke like any code that wasn't written by me in the last 3 weeks is garbage? Never heard me say that? Have you heard anybody say that or something similar? Yeah, there's this thing kind of among programmers and technical people where you like learn so much and so rapidly, and when you're writing code or you're creating, like you're under constraints that are not always like captured or represented in your final output. And so it's like really easy to go back after the fact and be like, oh my gosh, this is garbage. Who wrote this? Like, what were they thinking? And it like really sucks. But then you totally forget like what your constraints were under. So anyway, that's all just to say that like I look at some of this code and I'm like, wow, some of it is good. Some of it's really bad. I invited Jess Martin to come to this meeting because he knows Ruby too, and he could make sure that I didn't like tell you guys that this was the greatest Ruby code in history and like really lead you to think that that's what happened. This like there's nothing really special in this code. This is a pretty easy implementation. In fact, I reviewed a lot of code challenges in my time at this company that were way better implementations and solutions than this one, that were more robust. They're just like better engineering that we passed on. So the reason I got this job is because I followed all of the directions. Because some people were better engineers than I was, but that like didn't follow all the directions. Like I look at this code right here, and this is like kind of embarrassing that I would like do something like this. Does it, I don't want to talk about too much why. This line of code I'm like pretty embarrassed about. This one right here, I'm actually way proud of. This right here, this is called the shovel operator in Ruby. This is my favorite Ruby operation. So I like specifically organized this entire function just so I can make use of that. And then like 3 lines later, like here I am just like breaking open the law of Demeter and just like nesting at some stupid CSS thing that this could blow up at like 3 different stages and I would never know, and it would break my whole application. But it worked the one time. So this is like really irresponsible poor practice, but like this is like a good one. And it's amazing how closely they can be and how much nobody cares about that, as long as you've got the rest of it just like follows reasonable engineering practices. This thing too kind of makes me sad. So I mean, I don't know if anybody sees what's happening here, but I'm like assigning this magic string to this URL property. Like I could write this in a way that it could take a parameter or something and like default to this, but I didn't. This is me cutting a corner and making it easy. This was just, again, me being lazy. I would probably never, I don't know why I was using a while loop. I think this might be the only time I ever used a while loop in the entire, like my entire engineering history in Ruby. This is like very much not a practice. And I probably just like read a blog post or something that week and it was on my mind. I would write this completely differently. I don't know what I was thinking. And then if we go back to this one, there's some more good examples of just like, matching the whimsy of the prompt. It very much has like a KGB theme. It's the sketchy command line tool, so it prints out like a lot of dots to tell that it's loading, and that's like totally just hacked in there. Like you might think it's just like running like a bunch of dots across the terminal, which is kind of fun. Hard code some line breaks in there. Again, like this is just really lazy, really lazy code. But at the end of the day, they emailed me back and they were like, yeah, we love your solution. Come on in. And I met with the founders and they made me a job offer. And I started like a week later. So I think, let me check my notes. I think that's all I had to go over. We're good to transition into questions. I'll leave the code up in case anybody wants to talk about it. But I think we've got some questions, so I'm going to go pop over to there. All right. Attention to detail, bring your full 9 pieces. You better bring your full 9 pieces of flair. Jeremy McWilliams says, you mentioned you were under a time crunch. How much time did you have? When I wrote this, I was under a time crunch because I really hated the job that I was at and I wanted to leave as soon as possible. And my boss was like a total toxic, I was in a bad situation and I wanted to get out. So it's not that I was like they said it should take like 3 or 4 hours to write the code test. I probably spent 1 or 2 on it, but I just was like, I want to get this done tonight so that I can send them to him tomorrow, because I had like a day off planned a couple of days from then, and I wanted to use that time to just go into the office, get my job offer so I could quit my job and start. So it was just like artificial based on my like life circumstances at the time. Okay, let me jump over to Labs 19, see if there's any questions in there. No. Jeffrey says, was part of the reason why you don't like some of the code in retrospect that it wasn't written for good debugging? Yeah, I mean, so that's a really good question. So yeah, you'll notice that there's like absolutely no error handling in that code at all. It's just like, assume this all works, and if not, it's going to blow up and we're not going to do anything about it, which is just really irresponsible. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised that I passed the code test like with that, because as a manager, I'm pretty critical about those kind of practices, which just goes to show that I'm a total hypocrite, because looking back on this, I built no error handling at all into this. That from a debugging perspective, it's fine because it all just is like outputting to a command line tool, but it's more that it's like it's just really unsafe is the thing that I think I don't like about it the most. And that's just lazy. There's no excuse for that. Sam says, have you had time code tests you weren't quite sure how to approach? Yeah, so that's the other thing. Like this problem, like I said, I live coded a implementation of like pretty much this exact same problem. Just I was scraping a different website, but I had done it like within the last couple of months. I had prepared a presentation for a local meetup where I just like live coded it on stage, and it was like scraping is something that was a well understood domain for me anyway. It's a problem that I had been working on. That's like pretty much how I learned how to program, was just like writing scrapers. So yeah, this was kind of just like this was giving a problem to somebody who had like already well understood the solution. So I was, I was starting on third base. It was pretty easy for me. There have been times when I was given like code tests that were not something that was like a well understood problem that I had already solved like dozens of times before. And in those cases, I think the same principles like still apply. Number one, like always start from the instructions and make sure that like build a checklist of what the instructions are and make sure that your whatever implementation you have like hits the checklist. That's step one. And then step two is just like break the problem down into the chunks that will get you the most, like the smallest chunks that will get you like the biggest progress, the most progress. And it's totally okay to like, turn in a solution that's kind of, not optimized. Like if we pop back open, here, I'm going to show you the code for this. So this right here is the method that counts the exclamation points. So this method gets called by the process method, and it just sets the result to a score property in this struct. So like all of my reviews are going to pop out with like these 4 fields, and one of them is going to be score. So this analyze title and body is just like setting a score. In fact, I could change this method name to like set score, and that'd be even more explicit. But all it does is it counts the number of exclamation points in the title and then multiplies that by the number in the body. I could replace this one line 16 with any algorithm I wanted to process the fakeness of the review, and all of the rest of the application will work fine. So like if we were refactoring this, it would take no time at all to completely change the algorithm that we use to detect, which is like the business process of this application. So what I've completely abstracted here is the business functionality is like determine if the review is fake. That's completely separate from all of the other like meta stuff that the application does, like printing it out to the console, taking input, all that other stuff. And by completely decoupling those, it makes it really, really, really easy to drag and drop. So to like get back to what Sam was saying, like she says, have you ever had a problem that you weren't sure how to solve? What I would do is I would isolate the part that I don't know how to solve, which in this case is analyze if the thing is fake. Like I'm not a machine learning guy. I don't know anything about data science. I can't NLP this paragraph and determine if it's like fake or not. I could certainly learn how to do that if I wanted to and had enough time, but I like don't know how to do it off the top of my head. So what I did is I put my best guess on the thing I was most unsure about, and then I brought excellence, or right, like I brought my best effort to everything else. So this company, they were like, okay, I at least know how to do all the meta stuff, but like their specific business problem is the thing that I don't know how to do. So that's what I do if I have a problem that I don't understand, is like, let me abstract all the things that I do. Let me get those out of the way. And then I'll try to like keep the things that I don't understand as insulated as possible. That's kind of how I approach breaking that down, right? Because if you just start looking at a problem, it's like, man, determine if a review is fake. Like that's going to be kind of overwhelming, right? Like, should I like connect with the Watson API and like do the NLP? Should I like learn data science overnight and try to do that? Like, there's a lot of different ways to approach that problem, but that was the part that I was unsure about. So I isolated that from everything else that I knew, and then let the two pieces like kind of work independently. That's my strategy. Yeah, exactly. Eric says interfaces for the win. Okay, Justin says, so you did this test, but then didn't work on this type of code when you got the job. Nope. Would you say a code challenge that a company you're interviewing with more often than not tests you on what they're hiring for? I would say no. For a couple of reasons. Like number one, I actually think it's kind of unethical to ask somebody to do work in your interview process that's like 100% correlated with your domain, because then there's sometimes a temptation to steal that work or like, implement a solution. So this company very much did interact with online reviews. And they wrote a lot of scrapers. So those were two skills that they like wanted to, well, yeah, I mean, scraping reviews was a core part of their product. I didn't work on that team. But there was nothing possible in the solution that anybody could deliver that was going to like make it into their like stack. It was more about like seeing how people think through the problems, and more than that, it was about seeing if people had the right habits, the right like engineering habits to participate on the team. So like when I worked at this company, man, more than any other company I've ever worked for, they were really, really strict about testing. They just had like a culture of it. Like every pull request was required to include a test, or else it just like straight up wouldn't pass the CI, like wouldn't even get to a code review, and had like no chance of making it to production just because it like the checklist wasn't there. So that's what they were really screening for. Were some of those other things. I imagine like there might be some jobs that they try to like overlap their code challenge with what the company's actually doing and what the role is, but it's pretty difficult and expensive to write code challenges like this, and so they're not going to do that for every single role on every single team. Plus, like roles and teams are pretty fluid a lot of times in a software organization, so it's just like not practical to do that. So it's more that they'll be testing for culture and stuff, and like engineering practices and habits. And this is the same for designers and data scientists too. Like they're not gonna, if they're a company that does like NLP, they probably won't like give you an NLP problem that's gonna overlap with their domain 100%, just because that's not really practical. Eric says, what was your secret sauce from the last interview breakdown you did? I can't find the video. I will post a link to the video. I don't remember what the secret sauce was. I got a lot of secret sauce. I have this really, really bad habit of I will say, like, this is the most important thing possible about everything. So just like, I mean, a good practice is just to write everything I say down and then treat it as if it's the most important thing possible. Something about what to say at the end of the interview. Oh, yeah. Something about what to say at the end of the interview. I mean, I can't give you that one again. I can't have that on 2 different videos on the internet. I can't do it. Somebody can DM you, Eric, or I will send you a link to the other video, but I'm not going to put that on record twice. That's my secret. Can't have it getting out. All right, we've got 5 minutes. I haven't checked outside of the Slack threads. Let me check and see if there's any non-threaded stuff. People can't follow directions. Katie says, cooking recipe source control going to have 100% coverage. All right, Katie, recipe source control is not leaving labs until they've got 100% coverage. Challenge accepted. Man, I can't even imagine like what people not on this call are thinking as they're reading through these Slacks. Katie's not even worried. All right, Katie. Timothy says they have a test. It's a good start. It's a good start. Good start. All right, Jeremy says, so from the code test, you can get a fair idea if you're going to like working at the company. KGB sounds like they have a sense of humor. Actually, Jeremy, you definitely, I mean, you can sometimes, yeah. From the code test, you can sometimes get an idea if you're going to like working at the company. I hate to say that I did not like working at this company very much, and I didn't last very long. I left after, I don't know, 9 months or so. But that was for situations completely unrelated to the engineering team. It was pretty cool. Yeah, when I first read KGB, I was so thrown, like, seriously? Yeah, the KGB thing, I actually don't know. Like, it wasn't like that was like a common joke around the office at all. I don't know what they were thinking. I think they used to send out like a really formal, like a businessy version of this thing, and then like weren't getting very many replies. So I think they just added that in because they were pretty playful guys. Like, that's one thing I'll say about them. Nobody there took themselves very seriously, which was cool. Even the founders. Wes says 5 minutes of sweet guitar riffs. Do we have any other real questions? Oh, there's one. Maybe it's and they said KBB. No, it was very much KGB. That was intentional. April says, what if you're asked to apply but the test is outside your stack? Just do your best. Yeah, that's the kind of thing people are really patient about. Like, I don't expect everybody to know my stack. In fact, if they can do like a good job of answering the prompt and questions and stuff in their own stack, like learning the language ultimately becomes the easy part after a while. I've written production code in like, I don't know, 10 or 15 languages. It's not that hard to pick up a language after you have a good solid grasp on one or two. So in that case, like most of the time you're going to get a code challenge. They'll say use whatever stack you're comfortable with. If they do want a specific technology thing, then it's it's totally appropriate to discuss that with them up front. Like, oh, I've actually never used this thing before, but I'm sure I can pick it up, and then just do your best. Most of the time, though, what they're testing for is not your mastery of the language. What they're testing for is like your engineering practices. And so most places are smart enough to try to decouple that. Any advice on interviewing for a TDD company and never really done TDD? Well, yeah, you should do TDD, Eric. Come on, man. Like, again, this is the kind of thing where you want to do your best. For TDD specifically, that's kind of like a, I don't know, fake it till you make it thing. Nobody really does TDD well. Like, I don't know. And if they are doing TDD, most of the time that's like coupled with like pair programming. So you could be like, okay, you write the test and then I'll write the implementation, then we'll ping pong. Why unit test? Why you could integration test? Is that a serious question, Sam? Or are you trolling? Trolling. She's trolling. Okay. Because integration tests are not real tests. That's the answer to that. Can you recommend any resources for unit testing? Yes, I can. Like learning on how to unit test or learning why to unit test? So those are different things. How? Yeah, let me grab a link. Actually, I'll grab it later. I will drop a link about testing into the thread. I'll drop it into the thread later. I don't want to go be like browsing YouTube while we're all just sitting here. Because that would be rude.
Was that question about user testing?
I think it was about unit testing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, unit testing. User testing is also important and completely different.
Yeah, I was going to chime in and say, feel free to grab anybody from UX. They'd be able to help you out with that.
Yeah. Yeah, they would. Yep. All right, we are over time. Sure you have a lot to get done this afternoon. Sprint retro, sprint reviews. Please get those in. I'm going to stop the recording.